On behalf of the Clark Forum, Dickinson College, the Department of Military Science, I would like to welcome you to tonight's event, Journalism in Conflict, Reporting from Ukraine and Beyond. In many conflict zones like Ukraine, war correspondents and journalists act as a mediator between misinformation and truth, seeking honest stories and showing the rest of the world what life during conflict truly means. Today, Anthony Bourdain will discuss the role of war correspondents in regions of conflict, as well as the determined fight of journalists against the viral spread of misinformation. His experiences reporting from the front lines of Ukraine, using Twitter as a primary means of sharing video and photo content alongside written accounts of his work, provide a first-hand example of the power of using social media as a means of journalism. And now, please join me in welcoming our guest, Anthony Bourdain.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Natalia. And having spent a good bit of time in Poland, and a lot to be proud of in Poland's response, it's been really moving to be there and see how a nation, probably unheralded, has done so much to support the people of Ukraine. So good evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks for all of you coming out, and I think there's some logging in, so thank you for those who are logging in. I want to thank Dickinson. I want to thank the Clark Forum. I want to thank Gary and Sarah for actually getting me here, which took some pushing and some organizing. Thank you so much. I owe special thanks to a gentleman named Tom Kalaris for putting my name forward. Tom is an important friend of mine from London. He is also one of your Dickinson trustees. I'm sure he's a great asset for the college, and his support is a great asset for me always. So thank you one and all. It's a real honor and it's a real pleasure to be here. My background is in editorial, but I have spent my career as a practitioner in international development, founding and for quite some years now, running the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. IWPR is a not-for-profit organization. We have bases in London and in Washington, D.C., and we have field offices in several places around the world. We employ around 200 people. It's split between staff and consultants. Most of these are people who are based in the countries where we work. Our purpose is to strengthen the voices of local journalists and rights activists in areas of crisis and conflict. By giving voice, we aim to drive positive social change. Now, our headline topic right now as an organization is the increasing global threat of disinformation. I believe it is the scourge of our time. It is the challenge that prevents us from resolving all other challenges. It's the thing that divides us, drives conflicts, and undermines our collective capacity to find solutions. For these reasons, I believe it is perhaps our gravest single immediate challenge. But to explain this, we thought it would just be better if I focus on telling you my story, what I've been up to, what are some of the highlights, and what, if anything, I've learned. Now, you mentioned Twitter, and you guys are used to lectures, but for me, it's quite the challenge, having tried to boil it down to 140 characters now to go on for a bit. So to make it easier for you, I broke it into chapters, and there are 10 of them, so you can count your way through, and you'll know as we're winding down. So, and number one begins with early days. I began as an editor and as a reporter in New York City, where I was born. They were invaluable years, and frankly, I had a lot of fun. I didn't go to J school, and perhaps I should have done, but I did work with some very talented editors, and they beat my head in. An entirely obsessive copy chief taught me how to suss out the lack of clarity and questions and problems in every single unclear sentence, and how to make it read right. And a hard-as-nails editor taught me, as a reporter, to have a profound belief in the value of public knowledge. He also told us the incredible magic of the telephone, and you can never believe, once you get somebody on the line, what they'll actually tell you. But for all the lessons and the energy, I wasn't sure what it all meant. I was learning skills, but to what end? By the time IWPR started, I was in London, and I was at loose ends. It's a condition in journalism we call freelance. Basically, I was writing occasional stories and I wasn't making a dime. But I like to think that the real reason I got involved and have stayed involved is hope. Back in the 1990s, we still had monolithic mainstream media. I'm not sure the concept of mainstream is really a thing anymore, but it was a main point of argument then. The problem wasn't the splintering of everything and the onslaught of malinformation. The challenge was the reverse. It was the gatekeepers. This was before the digital revolution and globalization. We thought a fax machine was pretty cool. But we had a sense, an instinct, that there were unheard voices out there, and that their insights and that their information truly mattered. They needed to be brought into the conversation. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something different, and we thought we could do that by helping these voices to be heard. Number 2, War Report. The project started with a group of us producing a newsletter around the first Gulf War. We couldn't agree a better name, so that's how we got War Report. We highlighted contributions of Iraqis, Kurds, and other voices from the region. We squatted in some unused desks of a London political magazine, and the project ended almost as soon as it had begun. But a couple of us thought we were onto something. We soon moved on to what was the foundation period of the Institute in the Balkans, where we would work across the region for more than a decade. As Yugoslavia tore itself apart, chauvinist propaganda and vicious diatribes against others helped build hate and drive bloodshed. The nationalist media became a direct instrument of war. Our role was to highlight and strengthen different voices, responsible and professional journalists, democratic and constructive civic activists. Through a peace group network, we made links with local journalists and alternative voices in all parts of the collapsing federation. We traveled to Belgrade and Zagreb, and in an unforgettable week to Sarajevo in the days and in the hours before the outbreak of the war. Fatefully, we decided to split up. 2 of us would go back to London to raise more funds and produce the next edition, and 2 would stay in Bosnia. I was on the plane. For that first Bosnia War edition, we partnered with a brilliant Bosnian journalist who could explain the complexities of that country in a clear-sighted way no one else had. We also featured a Bosnia law professor who called for an international protectorate. The proposal was derided by some, but a few years and 100,000 deaths later, that's effectively what the country got. That professor's son, by the way, is still our designer and our webmaster. As the Balkan Wars continued, our newsletter became a magazine, and it grew thicker and thicker. After the Bosnia Peace Agreement, we opened field offices and launched journalism training and investigative reporting projects. We covered the International War Crimes Tribunal, opening up a long-running office in The Hague. I was in the courtroom the first day of the trial of former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. It was a breakthrough for international humanitarian law. Maybe there could be some progress. And we established a network of local media and training hubs which we localized and which continue to this day. Youth programming in schools sought to educate the next generation about a war that they had only just survived. 3, Srebrenica. An important sidebar here. We had already been working for 4 years when the genocide took place in Srebrenica. Men separated from women and slaughtered in the woods, more than 7,000 souls. All of this happening under the line of sight of the international community. It did not seem to me on that day that we had figured out how media could make a contribution to peace. Definitely, it was a moment of great self-doubt. Fortunately, a wise peace activist of many years reminded me of the concept, think global, act local. Even when high politics fail so horribly, even when rampant soldiers cannot be halted. Our efforts are at the grassroots, planting longer-term seeds for change and keeping hope alive. It was a lesson I would need to remind myself of many times over the years. For 9/11 and beyond. A decade on, and the circle closed. From Croatia and Bosnia, we had worked in Kosovo, and I was then in Macedonia due to the short outbreak of conflict there. On the way to my return flight, I learned that a second plane had crashed into the Twin Towers in my cherished birth city. My father had worked in those buildings until a few years before, and I knew them well. Suddenly, our efforts were no longer just about out there, but literally back home, too. Extremist ideals, violent propaganda, and hate speech, these had had such a dramatic but regionalized impact in the Balkans. Now they had gone global. Our Central Asia team had long been raising concerns about instability from Afghanistan, and it was inevitable that we would expand. First to Afghanistan, then a year or so later to Iraq, then Africa, then the Middle East, and now Asia and Latin America. We have so far worked in more than 50 countries. Each country is different. Projects have to respond to needs, gaps, and available resources. So there is considerable diversity in our day-to-day programming. Intensive training and mentoring, support for media productions, support for content on human rights and reconciliation, gender and LGBTI issues. A distinct feature of our work is to support civil society groups, human rights defenders, helping them build communications and advocacy plans, and working closely with the media. An increasing area of work is supporting the safety and security of journalists and activists when their frontline efforts or online presence put them at risk from hostile authorities, physically, digitally, or both. 5 challenges. Amid this, setbacks have continued. Governments have not reformed, dictators have dug in, frozen conflicts have flared. The euphoria of the Arab Spring, in which mobile communications played such an important role, turned ice cold. Syrian refugees surged across the same Balkan lands whose own populations had only so recently been on the move. It was heartbreaking to see lives and hope and a whole country so devastated. I think of it as Bosnia exponential, as if the world had learned nothing. I tried to remember the words of my old peace activist friend, and we carried on. On May 2nd, 2015, the eve of World Press Freedom Day, an ISIS bomb in the center of Baghdad killed Ammar al-Shabandar. A dear friend, Ammar was IWPR's long-standing head of mission in Iraq. He was also a cherished voice of hope. He was part of a younger generation of Iraqis, born in country, well-educated abroad, and determined to return and build something better. His vision of a positive future for Iraq was inextinguishable, no matter the events. His strategy of reducing conflict by building trust between communities through the media was effective. At its height, our program in Iraq under Ammar reached 150 Iraqi staff. TV programs on human rights, extensive work on elections, training, and more training, advising Iraqi officials on media legislation, briefing Western diplomats. Ammar was killed on a lovely Saturday afternoon, attending an outdoor concert by an Eagles cover band. He was an idealist and a rascal. I didn't discuss the concert with him, and I should have. But I know he felt that if he, of all people, would not attend such an event, who would? Hotel California. It was his last tweet. 6 successes. Yet we have highlights too, many examples of hope. Launching Afghanistan's first independent news agency, which continues to this day. supporting the passage of media reform legislation in Rwanda, and launching that country's first independently produced TV news program. Courageous conflict reporting from forgotten worlds, whether Uzbekistan or northern Uganda. We work in several countries under dictatorships. It is sensitive and complex. In some countries, we cannot make much progress. Our teams form, they disband, we try again. Some people have to leave their countries. A small number of colleagues we have been affiliated with have been jailed. Our most important rule is do no harm. So we have to work with care, and sometimes it's very slow. But in some other countries, we have been able to establish significant networks, creating a whole new generation of professionalized journalism, even in restrictive environments. A critical point here. A free and independent media is not political opposition. Yellow journalism, screaming journalism, doesn't help anyone, even if you agree. Supporting independent reporting is not a strategy for regime change. But factual accountability and critical thinking are essential for any healthy, efficient, and equitable society so that it can work out its own issues. This is a vital distinction that some governments get and many do not. For the moment, let me give you two tales. First story. Some years ago, a precocious 12-year-old living amid Taliban conflict in the Swat Valley of Pakistan joined IWPR's Youth Journalism Project. She started speaking out about efforts by extremists to prevent girls from attending school. She was spirited but remarkably composed for her age, reserved but with a sparkle in her eye. She became a peer educator in our program. She began to blog for the BBC. She won a Peace Award, and the rest is history. She suffered an assassination attempt but survived, moving to the UK. 2 years after that, Malala Yousafzai, who began as an IWPR trainee, became the youngest person ever to receive the Nobel Prize for Peace. Words matter. Individuals can make a difference. The advice of my old peace activist friend rang true. Second story. It was after Ammar was killed in Iraq that we launched a major new social media project. At that time, ISIS was ascendant, occupying Mosul and other parts of the country, as well as Syria. There was talk of the new caliphate. A critical source of extremist influence was online, particularly Facebook. A key challenge for open societies is that we do not believe in controlled information. We are confident that free competition of ideas will prevail. But extremists and dictators with central control have a certain advantage, especially in the online age. In ISIS-occupied Iraq, extremists were cleaning up online. The metrics of their reach far exceeded those of non-extremist voices. This was if for no other reason that there was no counter-effort. All else was uncoordinated, the chaos we call freedom. IWPR bravely claims that we defeated ISIS online. We did this not through a top-down strategy of messaging. This always fails. Rather, we built a network of 36 Iraqi voices covering the whole country, including women and minorities. We trained and resourced them, then we carefully helped them on their lead to produce coordinated reporting and social media content. They used all kinds of formats: reports, radio broadcasts, caricatures, theater, festivals, live streaming, and more. In the new online world, they found that covering the same topic in the same week can multiply audience and go viral. Unaligned efforts cannot build such common momentum. This was not our network, but their own understanding of the value of independent local voices working together. And with our help, it was powerful. At its height, the project reached up to 1/4 of all Facebook users in Iraq. It helped break the image of ISIS and create disgust with the extremists. Crucially, the outputs tended not to argue ISIS points, such as over interpretations of the Quran. Rather than validate extremist positions, the strategy was to demonstrate other visions, other ideas. Comedy and satire here were particularly important, bursting the bubble of fear. The high point was the Letters to Mosul campaign. We were supporting a remarkable web project, Mosul Eye, which was the only independent news source on the city. With Mosul under ISIS, a liberation attack was imminent, but with no access to information, the population would not know what to expect. Our Facebook voices promoted a message of solidarity, writing and tweeting letters to Mosul. The idea caught fire and was quickly taken up by Iraqi civil society. Before we knew it, activists were out on the streets in Baghdad, in Erbil, in Basra, collecting letters from people from across the country, all with the message, "We love Mosul." With hundreds and thousands of letters, these were photocopied into literally several million pieces and then airlifted and dropped by the Iraqi army over the occupied city. A besieged population was informed that the country itself supported them. A furious ISIS had to street sweep for days, and still the letters, messages of love, were found drifting in the wind after liberation. The Big Lie 7. So now, finally, to Ukraine. As one of our former editors wrote to me, it seems after all of these years, Ukraine is actually what IWPR was created for. This is an epical conflict. Not only is it the biggest threat to international security and the international system since the Second World War, it goes to the very heart of our values and what we believe in. Before the conflict in 2014, IWPR had not worked there. In the country of the Maidan pro-European revolution, the Ukraine media seemed so talented and so energetic, maybe they didn't need us. July 17th of that year was a significant date. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 from Kuala Lumpur to Amsterdam was shut down over eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. IWPR has a Dutch board of trustees, and they mobilized. Soon we launched a Dutch-funded project starting out with flak jackets and safety and security training for Ukrainian frontline reporters. The episode was also important for Moscow. In the view of some observers, it was a key step on its pathway to becoming an industrial-scale disinformer. Investigations by Dutch authorities and others confirmed that the missile was Russian and that it was fired by Russian-controlled forces in the Donbass. Russia's response was a comprehensive, multimedia big lie strategy. Digital security expert Ben Nemo described it as a Rubicon moment for the Russian disinformation machine. In an article in Foreign Policy, he warned that it revealed the Russian government's willingness to lie, fake, and defraud its way out of trouble, even when the stakes are potential criminal charges. That raises obvious questions about the Kremlin's willingness to show any modicum of responsibility and restraint during conflict. Nemo was writing at the time, and he was thinking then of Syria. But the foreshadowing of the current invasion is obvious to us now. He subsequently took a job as global threat lead at Meta Facebook. 2 weeks ago, he announced the taking down of a major network of up to 60 fraudulent websites set up by Russia. These sites, with coordinated output, forging leading news websites, including The Guardian and Der Spiegel, targeted readers in Germany, France, Italy, the UK, and Ukraine. The content all highlighted false narratives about the war. This episode only underlines what we know. The invasion is based on a profound and profoundly evil lie. There are 3 key texts, and you should read them if you haven't. Putin's historical treatise from last summer, 2021, his speech of doom on the eve of war, and a screed published this April by the Russian information agency Novosti, which is nothing less than a charter for genocide. The summary is that Ukraine and Ukrainians do not exist. Anyone who professes to the concept is a Nazi and a Western puppet, and they must be re-educated or destroyed. The big lie is the driver of this catastrophic war, built in the realm of competing truths, different truths, what the Moscow propagandist Alexander Dugin calls our special Russian truth. Truth not as facts, but as belief. As tension spiraled in mid-February, I reflected on that flight I had taken back in April 1992. This time, I flew not west to London, but eastward to Ukraine. Number 8, the wire. There is a lot to say about Ukraine, and we can talk about it over questions all night. For the moment, I thought I would make 2 points, tell one story, and then briefly outline our projects. So the 2 points. First, whether we are surprised or not by the current military developments, what I can say is that events are proceeding exactly as Ukrainians told me they would. When Kyiv was encircled and the entire country was being shelled, they said with utter confidence, "We cannot lose." When the war shifted to the east and Russia was crushing village after village, they said, "We will win." Now Kyiv is making significant gains despite Russian retribution attacks. In his walkabout video speech on their Independence Day this August, President Zelensky said, "Crimea is Ukraine. Make your own judgment as to what will happen in this war, but do not disregard the Ukrainians. Surely 2023 will be decisive militarily, even if the politics take much longer still to work out." Second, the real honor for me, true honor, in spending time in Ukraine has been to see a society totally unified and mobilized towards a common goal. This is a terrible tragedy for them, but it is also an enormous social phenomenon and utterly inspirational. In particular, the link between the people and the military is direct, often by relations, fathers, brothers and sons, sisters and daughters. It is an active and deep relation, as shown by the extensive volunteer movement. The entire country feels each news bulletin every day. In front of your eyes, you are watching the forging of a nation. Without the military and financial support of the West, Ukraine would be nowhere. They also depend on Russia's deep and abiding incompetence, what some call their second ally. But the most important factor is their underlying national unity. It is this which gives them the certainty that they will prevail one way or another. So now a story. I did not arrive in Bucha until a critical few days after the Russian withdrawal at the end of March. I was then back in London on break, and it takes a few days to travel. If you want a sense of the initial hours of this, look up the dispatches from the BBC's Jeremy Bowen, one of journalism's very best. By the time I arrived a few days later, the bodies on the main streets had been removed. 6 badly burned bodies had been discovered in the woods, and we watched as forensics bundled them into bags, limbs falling off. As I walked down Vokzalny Street, the one with that impressive column of destroyed Russian armored vehicles, I stumbled on a Russian boot on the ground. Looking down, I saw that it still contained a foot. For the most part, the crimes in Bucha and the Kyiv suburbs were the accumulation of individual killings, mostly for cruelty and torture, for frustration and thieving, for nothing. In Borodyanka, I heard of a man who could not resist standing in front of Russian soldiers and declaring defiantly, "Slava Ukraini," glory to Ukraine. He was shot. In another suburb, I know of a man I believe was engaging in some business with the Russians. The invaders were looting extensively, but so were some of the locals. I suspect this one Ukrainian had some profiteering in mind and was unwise enough to get into a squabble with the Russians. He was shot. Another man was shot in his backyard while his wife watched, essentially because he was in his backyard. And a girl whose body turned up in a mass grave one town over with signs of sexual abuse. Russians shoot people for any reason and for no reason. After all, Ukrainians don't exist. So here is that story. Neighboring Hostomel is home to a vital airport. In perhaps the key battle of the war, the Ukrainians managed to disable it. By denying Russia this air bridge, they saved the capital and they saved the country. I first traveled there on April 5th. We arrived at a pleasant house in the center at just about the same time as the sappers. They were coming to collect 2 bodies discovered in the yard. That would make it a dozen for them on the day, and it was still early afternoon. A crime scene is a crime scene wherever it may be. A robbed and damaged house, door ripped off, car windows smashed, detritus of rubbish and rough housing where Russians had based a sad and mundane scene. And through the trees to the side, 2 bodies, one face up, one face down. I could see the bullet wound to the face and the exit wound which the sapper fingered. I could see the pale exposed skin on the buttocks of the other. Everything that I witnessed suggested that these bodies were lying just where they had been dragged after their shooting, and that they had not been disturbed for weeks. One detail that really struck me was the wire. Like so many bodies in Bucha, their hands had been tied behind their backs. The hands of one man were tied by silver aluminum wire. The other, the older one who had been shot in the face, was tied with an exceptionally long piece of black wire, several meters of it, so much that the sappers had real trouble fitting it into the bag. Out front of the house, just over the high garden wall from where the men lay, was a phone pole, wires downed because of war damage. At the base of that pole, a large, sprawling pile of black and aluminum wire. Clearly, this was the wire by which their hands were tied. We learned that both men, in fact, had come from the neighboring house, with the bloodstains from where they were shot, just steps away. Wire is ungainly for tying, and you would only use such a long strand if you were in a rush, without tools, and working in some kind of frantic way. It's really annoying to handle. Even as small clippers would have made such an easier job. I grew up on a farm down south, so I know this. The wire stays in my mind because Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, routinely explains that the bodies in Bucha were put there by Ukraine. He claims there was a several-day gap between the Russian withdrawal and the first reports. In fact, it was only 2. But he said it was all a setup for the media. It's the Malaysian Airlines big lie, writ bigger and bigger and bigger. The problem is that Russian lies do not need proof. Lavrov does not have to prove innocence. He just has to raise doubt. In the West, we may say that we all support Ukraine, but not completely. And not so in Asia, not so in Africa and Latin America. Blur and confuse, talk fantastically about colonizers, delve deeply into murky history, make their own accusations of war crimes and launch their own tribunals, or just change the topic. What about Iraq? I have seen so many images of destruction and death across the country. Amid this, the clear evidence of that long and awkward black wire lashing the hands of a terrified Ukrainian citizen in the moments before his execution. His name was Andrei Askev. He was 58. This stays with me. No testimony, no claims, just basic facts I know from my own eyes. 9. Projects. There can hardly be a single piece of news from Ukraine that you receive that has not depended to some extent on Ukrainian journalists and Ukrainian journalism. because of language and expertise, content or contacts, and because of the extensive cooperation between international and local media. So this conflict, so horrible, is also a high watermark for local voices. At IWPR, we are implementing 3 program areas in Ukraine. Our first provides emergency small grants to a network of local media and journalism groups so they can continue functioning. In a collapsed economy, this is vital. We also run a series of safety and security training seminars and acquired and distributed 50 of the highest quality flak jackets. Our second funds Ukrainian journalists to produce stories, many at the front lines and where possible under occupied areas. A fantastic Ukrainian editor I met on the first day of the war heads up the commissioning, and our editorial team provide mentoring and support to strengthen the articles, refine the pieces, reduce the emotions, and increase the facts. It's the same as IWPR has always done. Our third focuses on justice and war crimes. Picking up on our Bosnia project, we produce a weekly monitor of the highly complex processes to bring accountability for the massive crimes across the country, covering local cases, international tribunals, investigative teams. As part of that, I was honored recently to host and travel to Kyiv with Sir Geoffrey Nice. Sir Geoffrey was the chief prosecutor of Milosevic, who I had first heard on that day in court so many years ago. A final component supports a network of Ukrainian human rights reporters to undertake deep dive research into war crimes across the country and make this information available to prosecutors as well as media productions. Through these programs, we at IWPR are incredibly proud to be able to play a role in supporting Ukrainian voices, and we are so grateful to the many funders and supporters who have enabled us to launch this work. 10 lessons. I am torn between despair and optimism. The intractability of some of the challenges we face, the entrenched conflicts and dictatorships and continuing attack on journalists and the media, and the spread of discord and extremism through disinformation, these are immensely discouraging. Yet the potential of citizen engagement, the power of local voices, and the growing international appreciation for these factors is sustaining. So what lessons have I learned? There are usually 3, so I will say 3, but with a starter. The starter is blunt. As former Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway once declared with her usual flair, Russia, Russia, Russia. Well, indeed. For all these years, Russia and Putin's efforts to destabilize the West and rebuild his empire have been in play, but we rarely connected the dots. Mischief in the Balkans, the devastation of Chechnya, meddling in Central Asia, meddling in our own elections, seizing parts of Georgia, Moldova, Crimea, laying waste in Syria, now Ukraine. It's a long list, and unless there is accountability, it will only grow. Beyond that, the first point is that there are no quick fixes. Solutions are long-term. Our Western habit of moving on too quickly is reckless. It is imperative to form lasting partnerships and stay the course. The struggle to protect democracy and freedom of expression must be sustained. Second, technology is value neutral. It can be a force for good and offers huge potential. It enables local voices to reach audiences they never could before. But it can also be used for ill. Russia is pursuing the big lie. China's strategy is only grander. As confirmed by a major research program we recently coordinated, Beijing is pursuing a sharp power strategy of manipulation and influence extending globally. Artificial intelligence has the capacity to increase only further the reach and impact of such disinformation. These factors put democracy at risk. There is a major information war underway, and we have hardly even joined the struggle. Finally, at the end of the day, the answer is people. The vibe I get from our training sessions is always the same, whether in Pristina or Bishkek, Kampala or Kabul. The desire I saw in Sarajevo 3 decades ago to communicate freely and honestly is exactly the same as I saw in Mykolaiv just the other day. A journalist colleague and friend in Kharkiv, Maria Abdieva, has spent nearly every single day since February reporting from the front lines. Her courage and her commitment are staggering. A human rights lawyer, Alexandra Matvichuk, is a slender woman with eyes of steel and pain. These reflect both her work recording war crimes across the country and her determination to bring Russia to account. Head of a leading human rights group in Ukraine, I have been fortunate to meet her on my visits to the capital, a true inspiration. A few days ago, she and her group, the Center for Civil Liberties, won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Individuals like these are what IWPR is all about. They know that truth is not about faith, but about facts, and they keep searching for it every single day. It is our long-term aim to contribute to peace and build change from the ground up through such forthright voices. They motivate us to do everything we can to help them to make a difference. And after many, many years, they continue to give me hope. Thank you.